I've been asked quite a bit about the Sony ZV-1 versus the Sony a6100, whether it's in DMs or on comments like I just recently got asking ZV-1 or the a6100. What are your thoughts when it comes to video? So let's dive in. So the Sony ZV-1, in addition to the Sony a6100, are two of some of the best budget-friendly cameras that actually really do punch above their weight class, putting other cameras and camera brands to shame by having a flip-up screen, unlimited recording in 1080p or 4K, no overheating, internal charging, and a ton of other features that I'm going to get into in this video. Now, this isn't going to dive into the specifics about, whether one is good for the other or none of those different details, sensor sizes, all of that stuff. We're not getting into that. We're just simply going to be comparing it for the use case of an entrepreneur creating videos much like this for your business, and you need it to do its job. You need to record your talks. You need to be able to do live streams and not have to worry about if the camera can really handle it, or record internally at the same time that you're live streaming, which is a feature I've only experienced on the Sony mirrorless cameras. And the ZV-1 and the a6100, they all do that. So I want to dive into some of the similarities, some of the things that makes them different as well, and why I really honestly still think at the end of the day, these are two very different cameras that you probably may not want to use either. And depending on the use case would be vastly different between the two. And I don't think they're all as comparable as much people think. So let's get into it. Biggest thing probably most people are going to see initially is the way that the screens flip up or flip down or flip out. And so with the a6000 series that we're going to see, the 6100, 6400, a6600, these newer models, you're looking at screens that kind of have this weirdo kind of a function to flip up. But I mean, that's what it does. It allows you to see yourself when you're recording, and it's actually not as bad as most people think. And the ZV-1 does what most of any flip out camera, when we're asking for this feature, we want the very angle, so that if you're standing to the side, the left or the right of the camera, you can angle it out towards yourself and still see it, flip it back around, and have all kinds of orientations with it. But let's get into some of these commonalities. First one would be unlimited recording, which both of these cameras have. I've recorded in excess of up to 2 hours on either of these cameras, and you're not experiencing any overheating. And I just recently did my tests with the a6100 up to 4K video, no overheating on either of those as well. The other feature that these cameras have that I think all cameras need to have at this point, that's clean HDMI out. We all need to live stream right now, whether you're doing a little bit of live streaming or a lot of live streaming, or you have a regular live show like I do every Friday at noon here on the channel. And so whether you're in either of those camps, both of them have clean HDMI out, and I think that's a very, very important feature. Stellar autofocus. Nothing beats stellar autofocus. Now, this isn't going to be listed in the menu says stellar autofocus, but just the ability to really completely rely on your camera. You're not getting eye autofocus in video until you get to the a6600, which is the camera I'm recording on right now. But more or less, they're all pretty much the same. And even the face autofocus is extremely reliable. It's just that much better with eye autofocus, but it's not anything not noticeable. A microphone input. This is highly, highly valued among the video community, the ability to put in a microphone into your camera, or to do like I'm doing right now, which is pumping the audio from my USB podcasting microphone into my camera. And I've talked about videos on how I did this and, different connections you can do with your camera. All of those are still applicable to the a6100 or the ZV-1, but both of them have a microphone jack. And then lightweight and compact. Both of these cameras are very light. They both take relatively small batteries compared to some other cameras. Like we look at the a6600's battery versus the a6400 or a6100's battery. Those are definitely smaller, and you're going to get half the performance out of them. In addition to the ZV-1's battery is the same ones that come in the RX100 series of cameras. And there's more on that I'm calling like the battery door debacle. That's kind of a negative with the ZV-1, which is an issue why you probably don't want to get that camera. It doesn't take away from the use of it, but we'll get into it. How about that? We'll get into it. Lastly, Video specs. Most of the video specs are comparable in both of these cameras, whether you're talking about doing 1080p, 120 frames per second, or just your regular 24, 60, or 30 frames per second. This is 24 frames per second. Or if you want to do 4K video up to 30 frames per second. So you're going to get that in both of these cameras. And I have used both extensively, long time recordings. Again, no overheating or any issues with that. I'm not going spec for spec with the cameras, but for most people's use cases, even though like the ZV-1 has like, I think up to 960 frames per second or 240, it gets really crazy. Like it goes into those really, really higher frame rates, for a few minutes, but that's something extra, but it's not the average use case that most people would look for. But I think for a good baseline, 1080p, 120 frames per second, so you know you have good, super crisp, slow motion video. So let's talk about the differences. There are actually quite a bit of differences, some things that the ZV-1 does well, and some things that the a6100 does even better. And again, I think that these cameras really get compared based on the price, and they shouldn't be. Just because a camera is both about $700 doesn't mean that they're going to be as comparable as these two are, actually in this case. But most cameras that are priced the same doesn't mean that they're actually going to give you comparable features. And because these do, I think most people start to compare them. And I honestly don't think that you should, because the use case and how you intend to use your camera is going to really dictate what you need to get. And I think it's that at that point, it makes it a very easy and a clear-cut choice. Real quick, just so that you're knowing what the use case would be. I think the ZV-1, because it can live stream, because it can record internally, most people are like, great, this is to do it all in one camera, great zoom, go to f1.8 to 2.8 on that 24 to 70 zoom lens. But that zoom lens is, permanently mounted and fixed to the camera. You can't swap it out. You can't include, other lenses if you're into that kind of stuff. Like I use my 10 to 18 if I'm getting out and vlogging and I want that wider angle look, or to zoom in or to have, the Sigma 16 and it be really, really sharp. And so you kind of got to know if you want those different things. And I'll touch on that a little bit more. But I think the ZV-1 is more so, yeah, you can use it as a YouTube camera or creating content camera, or, if you're trying to document your process, aka vlogging as an entrepreneur. I think it's fine for that. But I don't think that this should be the camera that you use for live streaming, just because of some things I'm going to get into right now about the ZV-1. As you know, ZV-1 is a point and shoot type camera. It has that fixed lens on there. Also has some good things like digital stabilization. A lot of the great things you've probably already heard me talk about, and some of my 5 favorite features that I'll link up above in the previous video that I already did. Some of the differences for you, if you're talking about this camera being for video, is going to be the smaller camera sensor. This is not a huge deal, but it may be a factor in considering if it's right for you or not. And so when we're looking at cameras like the a6100, the a6600, and on, you have that medium size sensor in there, and that is a APS-C size sensor. So it's definitely bigger than what you would see in the ZV-1. However, that may not be an issue if you're indoors and you're recording and you're using lights like most people do. It's really not that big of a deal. But if you're vlogging, just know you may start to see some challenges in indoor low light situations or outdoors, if that's a thing for you. Now, this battery door debacle, that is at least what I'm calling it, is basically on most cameras like the a6100, which is why I said you don't want to get this camera, the ZV-1, only for live streaming. It's great that it has it, and I think all cameras should have that. But if that's going to be the only thing you use it for, I wouldn't honestly recommend it because of this one reason. When you have a battery door and a camera that's built for live streaming for really, really long-term use, like, you can push that camera to its limits like I do with my gear and equipment. Every battery door on that camera is going to have a secondary door. And so if you look at the bottom of your camera, or if you look at pictures or whatever, then you'll see, even on like the a6100 here, then you'll see this battery door area has also a little lid right here. And that's for the cable to come out of the battery door successfully. So the great thing with the Sony cameras, which is different if you're coming from Canon's ecosystem, when you have a Canon camera, You cannot have the camera on and recording and have the battery door open. It has to be closed. Well, with the Sony cameras, it doesn't matter. My battery door actually is open right now because I'm gonna pull this card out, edit it, and upload the video as soon as it's done. So I was just like, that's just an extra step I don't need to have. Whereas again, with Canon cameras, that's something that you have to do. So with the Sony cameras, you could have the battery door open on the ZV-1, but there is this tripod thread that's threaded between the door and the camera body. You cannot have this camera on a tripod at the same time that you are also having the door open. So even if you did buy an RX100 AC adapter, so it could just dangle out because it doesn't have a built-in door for the cable to come out of, like most cameras do, or the RX100 cameras did, you would really have to jerry-rig this thing up some kind of crazy to make it work. And I don't see spending $700 to do something that the a6100 can do natively. And especially because the ZV-1, honestly, like I said, it's not built for it to be, an event live streaming camera or for you to be doing long talks consistently and stuff like that. You're doing some Zoom calls, some coaching client calls. All those things are fantastic and you can get away with it. I just don't think that this should be your camera for live streaming. So it can do it. And you should use it, but I don't think it should be the reason why you buy this camera. So if you're getting the a6100, the real difference would be just lens options. If you're the person that is probably going to keep the kit lens on the camera for the entirety of owning this camera, then probably, the ZV-1 might be fine for you. Again, that live streaming bit, I think makes the difference. And then lens options definitely makes the difference. And it is really the difference, again, just for having options. Do you want a more dynamic look? Do you want to just really put this camera on a tripod, use it nonstop for live streaming and recording content, and really just make it a workhorse of a camera? Having a little bit of a bigger body that can dissipate heat, even though it's not overheating, but just knowing that the camera's internals really can process a ton of content almost nonstop. That's the kind of camera the a6100 is built after, just like the a6400 is. So you got two of these cameras like I've done events with this camera. I have done projects with this camera. I've done my own content with this camera, recorded course content with this camera. Like I have pushed these cameras nonstop, had them set up for 5, 6, even up to 8 hours, connected to the battery for AC power. Just nonstop going, like seriously push the hell out of these cameras, and they have held up for now going on 2 years. So I know the stability that comes with this. With a point and shoot camera, you drop it once and you bend that lens element, the camera is trash now. You have to send it in for repairs. And sometimes the repair costs, unless you're buying it brand new, then still under warranty, the repair costs will cost as much as the camera. Especially if you're buying used or something like that. And now it's kind of pointless, where it's one thing if I could pop $100 kit lens off, replace that because something happens with that, versus at least the camera body itself being fine. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but I have seen people drop their point and shoot cameras, and once that lens element gets bent, then gets really dicey. So my final thoughts on who should really buy what specific camera. Again, if you're doing family vlogging, some light video recording, maybe you're not really planning on using this camera really extensively like I really talk about on the channel here, then the ZV-1 would be fine for you, or a B camera to supplement what you're doing. So maybe you do have a dedicated camera like the a6600, 64, a6100. That's fine. And then when you're out doing your day thing, or, traveling, when that becomes a thing again, ZV-1 is perfect for that. But if you're really talking about something that can hold its weight, just really go through a whole lot of work and handle the workload with some lens options and things like that, I think the a6100 is going to be the better buy for you. But here's one thing I want to say why you probably may not want to get either of these cameras, and put a little asterisk there, because we have the a6400 part of this Sony lineup. And so the ZV-1, again, I've said what I've said about that being, the use case for that. But there is one thing that ZV-1 has that the a6100 doesn't have, and that's picture profiles. And if you're an entrepreneur, maybe you're going to hire a video person at any given time. Maybe you're going to send your files to an editor and you want to have more of a dynamic look, flatter profiles and things like that matter or will matter. Maybe it's not something that you're personally going to do, but you'll hire somebody to do that. The a6400 probably should be the camera that you go for. Even though the ZV-1 has that, it's kind of like it's a gift in that camera, but it's not something I don't think a ton of people will use. Whereas with the a6100, it just comes in standard, not picture profiles, but the creative style. You got some other stuff like portrait and some other basic things, but nothing, not even a neutral profile to kind of play around with color grading. And I just think as an entrepreneur, if that's important to you, then I would say check out the a6400, because for the price of an a6100 new, you can get an a6400 used, just like this one. Literally, I bought this one exactly like I'm talking about, used, gently used, for about that same price point. I think that that would be a better investment considering what you're going to do with your actual camera. So those are my thoughts. What would you buy? You got the a6100 or you got the ZV-1? Which one would get to the checkout cart in Amazon or maybe B&H or wherever? But which one would you get? ZV-1, a6100? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll see you in the next video.